Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. A little while back I changed things up from my usual battle videos and did a report on the team that I did well with at the New Jersey regionals. People seem to respond well to that kind of analytical content, so I thought I'd try something similar here. A couple weeks ago, we wrapped up a 2 or 3 month long season for the Georgia VGC Draft League, where I actually managed to take first place. So in this video, I'd like to go over my thought process when participating in draft leagues, how I applied those principles to my draft in this league, and then maybe a few of the teams that I was proud of bringing. I won't be going through the matches themselves because they're actually all already posted on the Georgia VGC channel, which I'm going to link in the description below. All of the playoff matches are actually casted, so check those out as well as all the wonderful people who put it all together. If you're interested in my matches specifically, you should check out the semifinal and final VODs because I managed to earn a bye for the quarters. But first things first, I'm not sure if everyone here actually knows what a Pokemon Draft League is, so let's go over that first. For those of you who aren't aware, Pokemon Draft Leagues are kind of like fantasy sports. Everyone's given a limited number of picks or points that they can then use to select Pokemon from tier lists. The idea is that you only get some top tier choices, and you have to be creative with your remaining choices to make a functional team. You also need to keep an eye on your opponent's drafts, as you'll obviously be playing against them later. I usually just make picks to counter their drafts, but some people will even snipe the picks that their opponents may want based on their draft so far. So, like, if your opponent has drafted Regigigas, it might be smart to steal that Weezing out from under them. You draft a lot more than a full party, so each week you get to build a fresh team from your roster based on your opponent's draft. You can see all of the ones they have, but you don't know which 6 they're bringing. So that's why this format is just so fun, because people come to the matches with strategies that are just tailor-made for their opponents. And you get to see who outthought who both in the prep phase and during the battle. This league's draft allowed for 1 Gmax Pokemon, and then 2 Pokemon from tiers S, A, and B, and then unlimited tiers from picks from the C tier. That's because once you get down to that level, they're all just kind of bad, and you can take what you like. If you can think of something cool to do with them, then more power to you. There was then also a free draft at the end, where we were allowed to each get an additional pick from each tier. Honestly, I've never seen this before in a draft. I think it's a bit too generous. It kind of takes away from the spirit of having bad mons on every team, or more of them anyway. But you couldn't really count on it when you were team building, like when you were making your plans, because you'd be picking from the dregs of what everyone else had left behind in their first run through. So I don't think it affected balance all that badly. So now let's go over what I think are the most important things to consider when choosing the drafts to build your teams. So here you can see my draft. I was really happy with how this turned out from day one. One thing I forgot to mention is that draft leagues traditionally allow trades throughout the season, whether that be with other players or with the pool of unchosen mons at the end of it. I actually felt so good with this pool that I chose that I didn't make a single trade, and I'd like to go over the things that I consider as I was choosing them. In particular, I think there are really 3 main priorities during a draft. And the first is what I like to call top-tier generic game plans, what most people would just call gimmicks. Gimmicks may be one-dimensional, but if they're strong enough to do well in an actual metagame where everyone can pick 6 top-tier mons for the format, then they're usually really strong when people are stuck with subpar picks from a draft league and have to account for a bunch of these potential strategies. Basically, the idea is they're so strong that you can even see them coming, and they'll still be hard to stop. I believe that this is in the order that I picked my drafts, or it... yes, it was. So, with that said, you can see that my first pick was Spectrier, followed by Grimmsnarl as my Gmax pick. So that's because these two offered me the chance to do a lot of different things. I can either go with a slow-paced opener with Snarl and Will-O-Wisp plus screens, or I can go straight hyper offense with fake tears on Grimmsnarl plus life orb boosted max moves, and then speed control on Grimmsnarl in case there's something that happens to outspeed Spectrier, which, you know, doesn't happen all that often, especially when people can't just all have Regieleki. I then followed up with Metagross as my second S tier pick, because weakness policy on that plus Bulldoze or Sucker Punch and screens is also just incredibly powerful even in regular Series 9, so you can imagine how well it did here. Later on in my free picks, I grabbed Theramosa because Speed Swap plus Coaching is very strong on both Metagross and Moxie Salamence. And then Porygon 2 also can go offensive with Fake Tears support, which is just a fantastic gimmick when people are expecting it to be a slow Trick Room mon, which you can also just do because it does that very well, even when people know it's doing that. So yeah, and there's plenty of other things like that in this that you can go for in these drafts. Those were the main ones for me, but yeah, for sure, like Cradily, you could even do some kind of like surf gimmicks with its Storm Drain if you want to. But Yeah, so that is the first thing. I don't even necessarily think it's the most important, but I think it's the thing that I think about first when I'm building my drafts. The second is the more obvious one is type synergy. So most people will suggest that you accomplish this via typing cores, um, but I think it really just comes down to wanting switch-ins to as many major threats to your big targets as possible. Now you'll see I did go with I do have a standard Fairy Steel Dragon Fantasy core between Grimmsnarl, Metagross, and Salamence, as well as a Fire Water Grass core between Swampert, Moltres, and a bunch of different grass types, Rotom, Cradily, and Tangrowth here. They all accomplish different roles. But outside of those well-known cores, individual switch-ins can be just as important, like I was saying. So, for example, Metagross and Spectrier are my two most powerful picks, and they both have Ghost and Dark weaknesses. So I made sure to have two bulky Dark types of my own in Grimmsnarl and Mandibuzz to be able to pivot them out safely, even if one of those is already on the field. Similarly, my main max target Metagross is ground weak, so I made sure to have several flying types and levitate users to check that big weakness. And, water types to cover the fire weakness too, in addition to the standard dragon and the fantasy core. So yeah, you need to make sure that you have as many switch-ins as possible because you need to be flexible in a draft league. So speaking of flexibility, the final thing that might even be most important, honestly, is what I call tool coverage. Tools are kind of it's a phrase that's used a lot in VGC, and I feel like people don't have a strict definition for it, but for me, they are moves or abilities that give you utility outside of just killing things. The more competitive tools you have available in your draft, the more options you'll have for dealing with different opposing drafts, and the more unpredictable you can be. So, for example, what I mean by this is I have access to Fake Out and Screens from Grimmsnarl, I have Intimidate on Salamence, I have Trick Room on Porygon 2, Tailwind on Mandibuzz, Redirection from Tangrowth, Pheromosa, Spectrier, and Grimmsnarl all offer different forms of speed control between Speed Swap, Bulldoze, and Scary Face or T-Wave or Trick. Cradily neutralizes water attackers with its Storm Drain ability. Swampert, Spectrier, Grimmsnarl, and Tangrowth all offer various status conditions that can shift the game in my favor. Sleep from Yawn and Sleep Powder, Paralysis from Grimmsnarl, Burns from Spectrier. Literally all of these tools were huge for me at some point or other during the league, because they fit someone's draft just a little better than my other options. And finally, so I don't think it's quite as important as the three I just mentioned, but you should be keeping an eye on your opponent's drafts during the process to make sure they don't hard counter you somehow. For example, I was worried about a player named Strider who had pretty much managed to put together like a full meta Sun team. I was sure to pick up Cantonian Moltres here since Rotom Heat was taken into too high tier for me to afford. You put that with safety goggles, you can do pretty well as long as I could neutralize their Landorus. But honestly, if you follow the first 3 points, you'll usually be able to put together a game plan for any combination of Pokemon. Now, like I said, we are not going to watch the battles themselves, but I think there's plenty of time left, so I'd like to take a run through the teams that I prepared for the semifinals and finals for examples of how you can translate a strong draft like this into strong results in the league itself. So let's start with the semifinals against Padillac. So I've played against Padillac a bunch of times, both across events and Pokesports, Little Root Lessons, and in Georgia VGC, and the sets are always just so much fun. I think you can even find some matches of me against them in the draft league from Little Root Lessons and in the invitational video I did a while back. I usually end up clinching our sets, but Pat actually handed me my only loss of the main season, so it was really scary to go up against them in the semifinals where they could have just ended my run right there. I'll say now that this was my absolute favorite set of the season, so again, you should really check out the link in the description to watch it casted on the Georgia VGC channel. Anyway, let's take a look at Pat's draft here. This thing is scary. So just like me, they've got both Fantasy and Firewater Grass cores, so there's no obvious type weakness to exploit here. They also have some fairly obvious but powerful strategies available to them. Airstream users like Cinderace and Celesteela can boost the speed of Urshifu and just make it an absolute monster, especially if you bring something like Choice Band. There's Raichu to protect Celesteela from electric moves, while also potentially proccing a weakness policy with Volt Switch. And Comfey can pair with either special or physical dragons, with Latios and Garchomp there. They've also got access to a bunch of strong tools, like I was mentioning earlier, with Tailwind from Tornadus, Redirection and Sleep from Tangela, which can honestly just be a better Tangrowth with Eviolite, and then Burns from Spiritomb, and Trick Room from Comfey. So the lack of Intimidate here is kind of glaring and something that I would have been looking for if I was making this draft, but it's not really relevant for the matchup against me when my main max targets don't really care about Intimidate anyway. So let's go ahead and take a look at the pace for my team that I brought to this. So how do I handle this? When I lost to Pat in the main season, I was too scared of Cinderace's G-Max Fireball to bank on Metagross as a max target, but I ended up using Spectre instead, and as it turns out, Sucker Punch is equally threatening, if not more so, because you don't have that crazy physical bulk that Metagross does. So this time, I really thought it through and realized that the combination of Dynamax, Reflect, and Intimidate allows Metagross to tank a G-Max Fireball using its just insane physical bulk. So I decided to take that as my max target here. Celesteela is very scary, so I packed Thunder Punch for coverage into it, but that doesn't account for Raichu and its Lightning Rod, which would put an end to that. In order to handle that Raichu, especially since it could nuzzle me or something, and is usually too fast for Bulldoze to put me ahead of it, I gave my Metagross a very high speed investment of 228. This puts it at 119 speed, I believe, which is just one higher than a -1 Raichu. So we actually can pop its Sash with Bulldoze and kill it with Quake in order to tank a Celesteela hit very well and then hit it with Max Lightning on the following turn. This also comfortably outspeeds neutral Celesteela, even if pretty much unless they go timid, so you can account for that very well. But for the rest of the team now, we've got this Metagross Spectrier as our main strategy, but of course we need to shore that up. Support Spectrier always has this 4 move slot syndrome between the 5 moves that it wants, those being Shadow Ball, Snarl, Will-O-Wisp, Taunt, and Bulldoze. Now for this set, I chose to leave Taunt behind, and that's because Bulldoze is key to my Metagross game plan. Wisp is the only way I can control Urshifu's damage output without being suboptimal and using Salamence for Flare. And Snarl is just too good to handle Celesteela to stop it from getting out of control as a max target. Grimmsnarl and Salamence are here for defensive support as well, between Screens and Intimidate, but they also offer amazing coverage between Spirit Break for Urshifu, Flamethrower for Celesteela, and then you have that Air Slash Hydro Pump combo for Cinderace, when you can predict it switching between the Fire and Fighting types when it wants to take down our Metagross in P2. So speaking of P2, I'm bringing a fairly defensive one here in order to get Trick Room up because my opponent's team is very fast and hyper-offensive. Ice Beam and Thunderbolt, they make up that infamous Bolt Beam combo that has at least neutral coverage into almost everything in the game, and they're also my best coverage into this team because it handles Garchomp with Ice, Urshifu Rapid Strike, and Celesteela with Electric. In between a modest nature and potential download boost, P2 is definitely able to contribute significantly to the damage output. And then, of course, for the last slot, there's Swampert, who does well as a Yawn bot behind screens, but also functions well as a Trick Room attacker. But with that said, I actually just brought it as bait. I lost the main season set to Pat's surprise max overgrowth tech on their Celesteela, and I was hoping to bait that out again so I could go with the Metagross Spectre strategy that I outlined earlier. All this prep gave me a really strong position in the set, but my opponent also made some very cool preparations of their own, so you'll have to check out that set in the description to see what happened. So now let's go ahead and switch over to the finals. So I was up against Papa Shuckle in the finals, who was actually the number 2 seed after me from their main season record. Unlike Pat, we had never played before, so I had to plan entirely from their draft. You can see it's also really scary with a strong Fire Water Grass core between Charizard, Gastrodon, and Amoonguss. It also has some great combos like G-Max Zard plus Ninetales, and then you have Riolu coaching plus powerful physical targets like Urshifu, Galarian Darmanitan, and even Regieleki if you want to go that way. And of course, the tools available for the ton are just fantastic. You have Tailwind from Talonflame, Spore and Redirection from Amoonguss, Screens from Klefki, plus Speed Control by Thunderwave, Speed Control from Regieleki with that scary Electroweb, and then even Scrappy Fake Out from Kangaskhan, which makes my Spectrier very sad. So let's take a look at what I brought to counter this. So unlike Padillac Cinderace, I decided that Shuckle's Urshifu Single Strike and G-Max Charizard were actually just way too much for Metagross to handle as a max target. Because they hit on the special side, and of course the critical hits from Urshifu means that I can't Steel Spike up against it. So I opted for Offensive Spectrier as my primary max target into this. If you check out the EVs, you'll see I gave it just enough bulk to survive an unmodified Urshifu's Wicked Blow 94% of the time. You gotta account for if Sash or Scarf comes into play. And then enough power to guarantee the Oko on it with Max Strike before Life Orb takes me out. This left me with more than enough EVs for speed, so I could beat out Regieleki after a Max Strike drop. Grimmsnarl here is using a standard disruptive set to partner with Spectrier. I opted for Trick Iron Ball, the idea being I could steal a potential Regieleki Focus Sash while also slowing it down enough for Spectrier to just kill it on that turn. Spirit Break is invaluable against Urshifu here, and the Fake Out can be very nice to pop a potential Urshifu Sash and then just kill it with the Max Strike calc that I mentioned earlier. You'll see that I actually do bring Metagross despite being too scared to max it, and I'm bringing a Choice Band on it. It's partially for mind games. It baits out the Urshifu and the Charizard while also serving as misdirection as to what I actually intend to max. But the set actually does pull its weight. It's running just enough speed to beat Charizard after a max strike, after which I can hit it with an Adamant Banded Rock Slide. 4 times weakness, gonna do a ton. Ice Punch gives us coverage into Amoonguss, and Banded Bullet Punch is my answer for their Galarian Darmanitan. I can hit it super effectively, stab, guaranteed Oko, and so it can just take it out before it can use that Scarf Speed to hit us with Guerrilla Tactics boosted Flare Blitz. I hadn't seen Galarian Darmanitan in ages, but it's scary in the right circumstances still. Now, the real star of the show here was actually my Mandibuzz. I had never brought it before during the season or the playoffs, but it fit perfectly into this matchup. Because I wanted to lead Spectrier plus Grimmsnarl, I needed a Dark-type switch-in for Spectrier. It carries Wakanberry for Regieleki, and it can take any attack from any variant of Life Orb Max Aleki. So we're talking like Modest or Adamant, Physical or Special, whatever. That's so we can set the tailwind before potentially going down, and then maybe take it with Spectre in the late game. Overcoat and Taunt are a perfect counter for Amoonguss, and then Air Slash gives us that coverage into Urshifu to take it out easily in an endgame scenario. Now, as for the final two, Bulky P2 returns in this matchup to set Trick Room because I have such a powerful slow mode here. Like outside of the Spectrier, although this time it's bulky on the special side because that's where most of my opponent's big threats were. Tri-Attack is just nice stab coverage into almost everything on my opponent's draft, and Eerie Impulse can cripple their big main max targets like Regieleki and Charizard. We rounded out with Swampert, who is necessary as my only Aleki immunity, but it also has great coverage into most of my opponent's draft. All of this prep worked out pretty well for me. But once again, you will have to check out the finals on the Georgia VGC Draft channel, linked in the description, to see exactly how it went down. That's all I've got for this topic, so I'm going to be brainstorming for my next team. Until next time.